Great. Thanks for that great presentation, Abby. All right, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Stephane Perreault is a naturalist at the Greentree Foundation, a nonprofit organization with a mission of peace, philanthropy, and sustainability. Stephane is part of a team that reduces the spread of invasive plants at Greentree, a 400-acre property in Manhasset, Nassau County. The foundation staff also monitors the abundance of invasive insects and the impacts of non-native tree pathogens. Stephane also leads an array of wildlife studies at Greentree on birds, bats, moths, and the eastern coyote, and vernal pool fauna. Stephane is a graduate of McGill University's biology department with a BS and MS. Thank you. Please welcome Stephane.
Thank you, Cassidy. Thank you for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here. I've been removing invasives for 5 years now, although it feels like a lifetime. My colleagues have been at it for more than a decade. And LISMA has been a really good source of information for us, so it's really nice to give a little bit back and being here today. I'm going to start with a little introduction about the Greentree Foundation. It was created in 1982 by John Hay Whitney and Betsy Cushing Whitney. There are 3 primary missions for the foundation: a mission of peace, a mission of sustainability, and a mission of philanthropy. The mission of peace is really at the core of the values of the foundation. The Greentree Foundation organizes and hosts meetings for the advancement of peace, human rights, and the cooperation among nations. So the United Nations is one of our clients, but there are many other non-governmental organizations and organizations that come to Greentree to tackle these difficult challenges. The mission of philanthropy is all done at a local level. It is done through 2 organizations, the Manhasset Community Fund and the Long Island Community Foundation. And the third one is sustainability, and this is why I'm here today. I like to show this slide to show how Greentree is actually an urban oasis in the middle of Manhasset. It's a 400-acre property, and it is a private property that is closed to the public. So there are many types of sustainable initiatives that are done at Greentree. Some fall under climate change initiatives, other is about water protection, which is very important to the foundation. And the third type is about how we manage the land and wildlife. So in addition to managing the forest, we have a landscape management program, and we have a grassland restoration program, which is about 70 acres wide. But we are here today for the forest, and we do a lot of plant and wildlife studies. And we believe at our core that in order to properly manage the forest and the land, we need to know what plants and animals are there. And this is what really drives what we'll be working on. So we're going to start with that, actually. So we're very lucky in 2022 to have scientists from the New York State Heritage Program, Greg Ettinger and Rich Ring, to come to Greentree to conduct a plant community and rare plant surveys. That was a game changer for us. So we'll start with Greg's results in terms of the forest communities. He categorized 167 of the 207 acres of forest as an oak tulip tree forest, which is imperiled in New York State. And we had 2.1 acres of red maple sweet gum swamp, which is critically imperiled in New York State. So it was very rewarding for us to understand that 80% of the forest at Greentree actually were imperiled forest communities within the New York State. So we were already committed to our invasives removal program. This was kind of a shot in the arm, right? So this is, hey, we're doing the right thing here. We have a lot to protect, and it was great to hear. In addition to those imperiled communities, there's 38 acres of southern successional hardwoods. You can see that they're on the edges. And if you saw aerial photographs from 100 years ago, some of these blocks were actually not forest 100 years ago. So this is more recent, and those tend to be very heavily infested. So we actually deprioritize those areas because there is so much work to do that we work primarily and really almost exclusively in those imperiled ecosystems. There's 2 rare endangered species at Greentree and a threatened species. We in terms of invasive removal, we really very, very carefully remove invasives around those areas. So we map where the exact locations are. We know where they are. And I go in there and I just remove it myself. It's really not a big area in the grand scheme of things, but we absolutely prioritize those areas so that invasives do not encroach on the endangered species. Here's a different set of data that came from the New York State Heritage. It's listing the types of trees and the approximate acreage or the relative acreage that they're present in. And you can see that the top 6 species were actually native. And then you get to Norway maple, Amur court tree, and at the bottom we have Ailanthus. So as far as canopy and subcanopy trees, that's what we're dealing with. 2 things that we take away from this. One is that 95% of the canopy at Greentree is native plants. This is good for us, obviously, but it's very important in invasive management, right? So if we remove the invasives, we don't need to plant and purchase canopy trees to plant them in the forest. There's so much seeds available, and it probably will just take place on its own without even propagating the species, although that's an option. The other one is subcanopy cover. Not so good there, right? So a third of the subcanopy is non-native species, and that's coming from Norway maple. Now, this type of information is very different for us. What it means is that if 1 or 2 or 3 trees were to fall next to each other, they create a gap in the forest. And guess what's going to replenish or replace the native species? It's going to be Norway maple. So you can see that if this is allowed to let go over several decades, that this ratio is going to change, or the order of things are going to change, and Norway maples is going to become more and more prevalent in the canopy. And this is what led, we already sort of knew this already, but this helps us illustrate what we do, which is what we have this strategy that we called forest gap management, where we prioritize removing invasives in those gaps to make sure that what's going to replenish the canopy tree is going to be native tree species. So we do this by removing Norway maple and also removing winged euonymus, which shades the seedlings of oaks and tulip trees, and it's giving it a chance to the next generation of canopy trees are going to be native. So that's our strategy. So as far as the understory composition, it gets worse and worse as you get lower. So winged euonymus is a huge problem at Greentree. I have a lot of other friends on this list: multiflora rose, linden viburnum, wild privet, English ivy, Japanese honeysuckle, and bittersweet. So I'm at war with these guys. It's a war of attrition. You can't win the war in the short term. So it's a long-term proposition. So how do we go about waging war? Well, three tools: herbicide, machinery, and hand tools. So we've sort of tried trial and error with some of these. As far as the herbicidal aspect, well, using backpack sprayers really help you to focus directly on the targeted plants, right? So you can do basal application if the winged euonymus is big enough, or you can do foliage application. So we did a small area of the forest in 2018, the results actually were pretty good with pushing back the invasive plants. So it's been 6 years, and I was there recently, and there really is not that much. We need to go back and clear it up again, but it's really not that bad. So it's the equivalent of, if you use machinery, like 1 growth season, it's that little that came back. And with hand tools, the equivalent of 2 growth seasons after you remove with hand tools. So clearly, it pushes back invasives, at least in the small sample that we had, more than these other tools. The downside is that you can't be 100% accurate in your spraying. So if you hit native plants, you can damage or kill them. And the other thing is we have water conservation initiatives at Greentree. So we really try to stay away from the herbicide. So we haven't used this technique since 2018 in the forest. So machinery, this is a skid steer with a brush hog in front. So kind of really neat equipment. And it's great for really infested areas. So that's where we use. We have a lot of infested woodland edges at Greentree. So anything facing south as far as edges, it's filled with mugwort and ailanthus and porcelain berry. It's a mess. So in August and September, early September, we go in there and with the brush hog and we take everything out. So we wait till the birds are done breeding, but we do it before they go to seed so that we really limit propagation. So that's the idea with using this. From 2015 to 2020, we went in the woods with that thing because winged euonymus, some areas are infested, so you can even walk through the woods. So what it does is that it really does a nice job clearing. It looks good once you're done, but it doesn't uproot anything. So it comes right back. But if you had to access it, it's an interesting tool, and it had its use, certainly. And then that leaves hand tools. So good old shovel and honeysuckle popper. Although I have to say that the root slayer is the ultimate shovel for invasive removal. I highly recommend it. They're about $70. I'm not paid by the manufacturer to say this. I don't even know who the manufacturer is, but if you Google root slayer, you can access it. So we love these shovels. We go out there, they go right through roots with a little bit of effort, I have to say, but still. The honeysuckle popper, we don't use so much anymore, but if I'm out there on my own, it does provide leverage. It's a little easier on our body to take out a tree, and I can sort of do it on myself. It's about 30 pounds, or it feels like it's 30 pounds. It's a metal rod, and you need a tree that has horizontal roots, like winged euonymus works, and you just pry it underneath, and with the leverage, you just pop the tree right out. So the idea with those tools is that you want to uproot the plant. If you uproot the plant, it's not going to come back quickly. For like small trees or big euonymus, the guys, they do a semicircle about 1 feet to 2 feet around the tree. So we break those roots. And then there's one guy or two guys at the other end, they pull the tree out. And when they do this, because it's pretty wet soil in the forest there, they bring the entire root system with it. So about 3/4 of the root system is taken out that way. It's pretty efficient, but it's definitely hard work. So what we do is it's two guys plus me. We go out there, we have gloves. We try to yank anything that comes out on its own. If it doesn't come out or after a round, we take the shovel and we take them out. And then I've explained what we do with the small trees. We work in November and in March. That's because the temperatures are perfect. So you want to work when it's 35 degrees to 55 degrees. Productivity plunge if you go to 60 or 70 degrees. It's just what it is. It's really demanding physically. This is a little bit of just halfway through as we go through the forest, is to show you what we're doing. We're like a really slow wave that's going through the forest. And this is to show, like in heavily areas where there's a lot of euonymus, you make giant piles every 50 feet. That's how heavily infested it is. We want to pile it because we want to go back and have a clear area where we want to do like what I call our maintenance when we go back, our follow-up, where you just take them out. You don't want a mess and you want clear access. And those piles biodegrade surprisingly fast. So after 3 years, they're pretty small, and I'm sure after 10 years, they'll be gone. This is just an area that I worked in. This is how we mark our forest gaps. So there's invasives in the middle, and we find the closest native tree and we spray it with yellow. So when we work in the priority area, because there's invasives everywhere, we want to prioritize. So we know what the boundaries of the work area is by those marking those yellow, those native trees in yellow. So how do we go about like this process for forest gap management? You walk through the forest when there's foliage and you see those gaps in the canopy. So usually it's caused by trees that have fallen. And here's the forest gap. So we go in there and we pull the winged euonymus and we pulled a Norway maple. When we work in the spring, winged euonymus is actually pretty easy to tell apart just from the barks and the twigs. And the Norway maple, you can tell apart from the native maples with the buds. So in the spring, in March, you can see the buds. So it's doable. But in the fall, we like to do our follow-up. So where there's foliage, we can actually tell the native from the non-native apart. So we do sort of our cleanup or follow-up in the fall, and we do what I call transformation in the spring. We mark the trees that are too big to be pulled with blue so that people that are going to go back later and take the trees out know what to take out. And we use GIS to map our gaps, right? So I have it against our successional hardwood here. You can see that 20 out of 21 gaps were actually in the areas with oak tulip tree forest. So that's where we want to work. It encompasses about 5% of the forest, and those are high priority areas. So it's a way, going back to the prioritization strategy, there's Norway maple throughout the whole forest. If we just spread our effort, we would just, it's really needed in those forest gap, and that's what drives, because the race is on. From the time that those trees fall, it's a race. Who's going to be the next canopy tree to fill the gap? So this is our strategy and how we go about it. This is a one man's work up the hill in a forest gap. It's as hard as it looks working in there. And just that gap alone, we spent 113 hours, and we're still not done with the original cleanup. So we use our GIS system to actually record where we work so we can keep track of our efforts. And the other thing I want to mention here is that, let me just go back here. So you can see like that little donut thing is, we separate the work in what we call transformation versus maintenance. Those are actually terms used in GIS, but I actually thought they applied great for invasive removal, where transformation is the first time you go out there, it's really heavy work. And your maintenance, you need to go back to take the invasives that have grown again. So we call that maintenance. So what we found is that with the winged euonymus especially, you have to go back either 2 years or 3 years later. If you go back 4 years later, you're starting to lose control, and then it becomes heavy work again. So you want to keep it where it's pretty easy in comparison to transformation. So we're at right now, 90% of our work has been transformation, but as we transform more and more, we'll have more maintenance to do. So we're going to go closer to 50% over time. Oh, we talked about all these things. This is the forest edge at Greentree. This is the edge of a tulip tree forest. Looks great. So let's try to go in. And that's what you face, a wall of winged euonymus, 4 feet of winged euonymus. I raised my phone to show a picture of what's inside. Maybe it's just on the edge. Unfortunately, it's winged euonymus as far as you can see. That's the challenge we're facing there. It's not pretty, and it can be pretty discouraging. Those prioritization strategy are keep your sanity, right? So I have to walk through these woods looking at invasive plants all the time, but I know that we're working where we really need to work. So those forest gaps where there's endangered species, that's where we work, and I keep my sanity because I would lose my mind looking at this all day long. So this area I want to show you, this was brush hogged in 2019. So that's 4 years. I took this picture earlier this week. 4 years of regrowth. It's about 3 foot tall winged euonymus. Remember, the brush hog doesn't uproot, it just cuts at the surface. This is the result of our work with the hand pulling. So on the photo on the left is along one of our trails. It was brush hogged in 2016. The picture was taken in 2019. So that's 3 years of growth of winged euonymus. We did a transformation with the shovels in 2020, and we did a maintenance in 2023. So last fall, we did our maintenance. It looks great. It looks so good without young winged euonymus. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. But then also looking for native plants. So that was Wednesday. Put the presentation a bit last minute. So I went out there and took pictures of native plants, and I came up with 12 native plant species in that area. And this is kind of the reward for all of our hard work is that there are native species. I have to say it's not always like this. There are some areas that have been shaded for decades, and when we pull and we go back a year later, there's not that much native. It will take longer. I do believe it's there, but this is why we're doing this. The nodding trillium is definitely the pièce de résistance for that group. It's actually on the watch list for New York State. So that's our invasive management in a nutshell for the forest. So I have a little bit of time, so I can talk about other projects that are LISMA relevant. We're kind of in bonus round. So we do keep track of non-native tree disease. Beech leaf disease is what takes the most of our time, but oak wilt also. We have a history with chestnut at Greentree, and we do keep track of where the elm are on the property. So a little bit about our beech leaf disease monitoring project. We've assigned beech trees that we are monitoring. So we mark them and we monitor them. We started that in 2021. And we have in the field, this is from an iPad, we have a form that we fill, and the percent of striped leaf, percentage of leathery leaf, and percent foliage transparency are standard measures for measuring beech leaf disease. And we added percent defoliation for the little saplings. It's a little subjective because we have to try to figure out how much foliage there would be and then how much is gone. So it's and all of this is done by eyeballing because we have to do, I think we're at about 40 trees for the property, and we want to do it all in one day. So we eyeball, it's our consultant and we go out there and we each come up with a number for each of those measures. We talk about it. Sometimes we negotiate, we look a little closer, and then we came up with a number, but it's us year after year. So we have that consistency. It's not that scientifically, it's not empirically measured, like we don't sample, but it gives us an idea. So this is when you look underneath the beech. The one on the left has 5% transparency. That's the equivalent of a healthy tree. On the right, we measured that as 80% transparency. So these were taken on the same day last year. And just to show you the difference between beeches and the impact of beech leaf disease at this time, there's really great variation. And these are our results. Percentage of leaves affected, which is leathery plus stripe, went from 1% in 2021. I kept it for the September survey so that to keep it more even. So 6% in 2022 and 38% of leaves affected in 2023. So I'm a little scared of what it's going to be in 2024. Transparency, a similar trend. We're at a 25% transparency now. Clearly, this has an impact. Think about the amount of light that goes in the forest. Now, it's already have an impact. These were for mature trees, but saplings, it's kind of the same trend. It is thought that, or we hear that the impact of BLD is greater on young trees than greater trees, or actually it's quicker. It seems to be the case with like 60% of the leaves affected already in our sample. We have an additional measure of just like the overall tree health on a scale of 1 to 5. And our beeches, primarily through defoliation, have a much worse rating now than 2 years ago. And this is going to impact Greentree greatly. So 15% of the canopy, 28% of the sub-canopy. So that's really the counterpart to Norway maple in the sub-canopy. So this is going to have potential really great impact at Greentree. Hopefully there's some resistance in those trees. Some trees will resist and will have protection of local genetic diversity. But we are ready to implement our forest gap management to where the trees will die. So that doves in nicely. All we can do is make sure that what's going to replace the beeches if they die is going to be native species. Oak wilt, it was great to hear at the symposium earlier this year that there's no current cases of oak wilt on Long Island, but we will continue to do a couple of days of surveys, one in late July and one in early September. That's our schedule for this year. It's foot and drone. So we added the drone capabilities last year. So we spotted this dead oak in the forest. Our analysis was that it wasn't oak wilt, but it's just to show you that the drone's great to picking up these dying trees, especially since oak wilt starts at the top. So you would get discoloration at the top. So the drones are great for that. And I saw that that's what's used upstate. They use drone technology as well to detect oak wilt. We haven't detected it at Greentree, but oaks are such an important part of the forest there that we really don't want to let it spread. So, and the good news is that if you find it, if you cut the tree, it looks like that limits the spread. So that we're ready to detect. So we'll continue this program. We have invasive invertebrates. Also, viburnum leaf beetle was the first detected in May 2020, but it could have been there before. It's really affecting southern arrowwood, viburnum dentatum. We have a lot of maple leaf viburnum, and we have, I think, 4 species of invasive viburnums. I've never seen any evidence of the viburnum leaf beetle on any of those plants. So that's kind of good. Southern arrowwood is not an abundant species at Greentree. It's found in small amounts in the wet areas. So we'll keep monitoring that. Spotted lanternfly, we had the sticky tapes on about 10 ailanthus since 2017. And we found the first lanternfly in Nassau County in 2020. Yay. There were 5 in 2021. And then we had our first larva in 2022. So the number sort of exploded. Last year, there were hundreds of lanternflies at some of our stations. And so that's, again, a little scary what it's going to be this year. One of the things we are asking is what the actual impact on wild areas. And it's not that obvious, but perhaps the vitis will be effective, the native vitis. I haven't heard anybody talk about that, so I'd be curious to see what anybody thought. And I've heard that in southern states or states to the south that black walnut saplings have been affected as well. So we do have black walnut on parts of the property. So I'm not sure how much of an impact it's going to have on our wild areas. Spongy moth, we do black light surveys at Greentree. Steve Walters, our consultant, very lucky. We've inventoried about 800 species of moth in just 4 years of surveying, another 50 species of butterflies. One of them is spongy moth. I was very excited to get a new species in 2021. And then Steve told me it was gypsy moth. So I wasn't so excited after that. So we actually it's easy for me to keep track and count actually every spongy moth we have. We have, of course, a GIS app that can do this. So we'll continue to actually count every gypsy moth we see from our surveys. Right now, the most we've ever had in one night is 6. And Steve has done surveys all over the tri-state area, and he's telling me that this is nothing, right? So it's a very small number. It could be that we're just in a down in the cycle, but we'll keep an eye on that. But so far, it's looking good. And the emerald ash borer, ashes were doing horribly before the borer anyway, so there wasn't much in the forest. Most of the ash trees were planted in the landscape, and they're doing even worse right now that the borer is here. So that's done. We're done. No, not done. We actually map all the elm on the property. So we have about 25 wild specimens. Only a couple are greater than 30-inch in diameter, but they seem to be doing okay. So we'll keep an eye on them sort of non-quantitatively. And finally, we have about 20 wild specimen of American chestnut. They're all reshoots from probably big trees that were there 130 years ago. So we keep an eye on them. We're interested in the insect populations because we love insects. And we actually had an intern, Carissa Hoff. She's a Hofstra student. And she actually, the publication is in press on a study on the leaf miners on American chestnuts, will be published in Environmental Entomology. It's really interesting. The history of chestnuts is really interesting, and the foundation participated in a little bit of research on American chestnuts as well. We have an arboretum that has 8 species of chestnuts. So it's a little tricky with doing some work on recovery because we have those non-native species on the site, but we have our own education program for the chestnuts. I'd like to also thank John Patente. John was a instructor for the Teachers Ecology Workshop, which is sponsored by Greentree. So it's 1 week at Greentree and then Saturdays throughout the year on different sites on Long Island. It teaches elementary and high school teachers to teach environmental science outdoors. So it's a really neat program. And John, throughout this, was telling his own story about his 3-acre property in Suffolk County and how he just removed the invasive plant and then enjoyed to see what was coming up that was native. It's a very simple concept that I was inspired from, and that's what really drives our forest management approach. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephane.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you.